All right. Welcome to April's version of Public Space. Um, I thought it was pretty funny that today is April 1st, April Fool's Day. And here we are gathering. Uh, some would say we are fools for gathering on such a day, but it is a matter of perspective in terms of foolishness. Um, and today the theme is showing up. So thank you for showing up. Um, and we're going to talk about showing up through the lens of religiously traumatized people, um, because that is at the heartbeat of this community in terms of why we even are gathering to hear one another and feel safe enough to gather. Um, and there's so many things that get in between us and showing up. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Seem to be the very thing that's kind of in the air, and a lot of us, are smelling it, breathing it, but we're not talking about it. So, all right. Let's open up with the opening meditation. Just saying, are you interested? Do you want to try it out? Doing the opening meditation? Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay. Opening meditation, a centering of space. Oh, great and unexplainable phenomena. You who is, was, and will be a source of life that inspires such a gathering of life. Experience us as we are, naked and afraid, traumatized and colonized, lost and stolen, hopeful and imaginative, colorful and meaningful. We choose to gather and celebrate life as well as ourselves. We remember, honor, and learn from those who were before us and built the foundation for which we are beginning to build on. We are tired and at times weary from keeping up with human society. Sometimes we need a break, a place to share without fear of judgment. So we gather in a public space to be with the many poetic images of God.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Beautifully recited. Um, and so today's offering of poetry comes from ourselves, and it's called Christopher. A child sits in the center of a dark room crying, meditating on an angry thing, hyperventilating over trauma, hate being fueled by revenge, a child lost in a sea of tears, an indecent child trapped in a box of religion, in a cave interpreting shadows on a wall. A child sits in the center of a dark room, reminiscing, imprisoned by the things that hurt most, paralyzed by abandonment, yearning for a mother's hug, a hug we never got. Death came before a hug. A child sits in the center of a dark room alone, blinded by the morning light. Change is an unthinkable thing. A starved child becomes a black hole. Not even the light of self can escape. A shaman's shadow follows me in journey. So today we felt inspired, moved by the spirit to just talk about showing up and what's that mean for people that have been religiously traumatized. Um, and typically, our religious trauma comes from the practice of colonized beliefs, you know, thinking structures or patterns that suggest and imply that God agrees with that there's one way of doing things. And it just so happens that one way creates these two positions of oppressed and the oppressor, colonizer and the colonized. And so we're here, um, and we are outside of religion, so to speak, and we're gathering outside of religion. And when we were reflecting and meditating on how public space would grow and become, there was things that we didn't understand and foresee. And we are here to be completely transparent and sharing those things that we did not see or understand. And it's this concept of showing up. This concept of showing up, we before we started this project, we were thinking in a colonized way. And that colonized way said showing up is mandatory. It also implied that showing up meant that you are of high value or low value. It implied that to not show up, you should feel shame. And so we're now in a place of deep empathy and trying to even understand further, how do we redefine these things? How do we understand or see it differently? Because now we're dealing with or experiencing religious trauma. And so the difficulties of showing up. And we thought about this, and kind of a story, a myth came into mind as we were putting things together. And it went something like a child sitting in a space all alone, in a very dark space, feeling alone. And feeling alone led to this feeling of hurt, trauma, maybe even the notion or belief of abandonment. Um, and then from that child created what we know as existence. So everything that it created, in those creations, there's a stem, a small amount of that pain, that trauma that took place. This child created out of feeling alone. This comes from Sufism belief. And it is so, to me, theopoetic in the sense of it's not pointing the finger in terms of who was hurt first, but it's now trying to make sense of where does our pain come from, and then boldly say that our pain came from the original source, God. That God felt this pain, this suffering, and it trickled into God's creations. And we're just, experiencing it and mimicking it, and we're trying to make sense of it. But then we've even come so far in human evolution and advancement that we're blaming ourselves now for it. And it's like this endless perpetual cycle of just telling us what is right and what is wrong, but it's so conflicting. And that's why we're just glitched, so to speak. Like certain things just don't make sense anymore. You question whether God is even real, or is God something that was just told to me. Like, I think a lot of us in this community are at a point or a crossroad where we're challenged with the idea of what's real and what's not real, because so much of it came from a colonized perspective. So now we have to go through this process of figuring out what is part of the colonized process and what's part of our natural process as human beings, you know? And so this religious trauma is not brand new. It's not recent. This has been going on since the beginning, antiquity. All right. And it's just crazy how people may think that religious trauma just came from our generation of millennials in terms of our sensitivity or something. All the while it's been there, and maybe people just didn't have the adequate tools to, talk to it, and try to challenge it. But, we're obviously in a time now where a lot of us are speaking up more and, forming spaces to create community, right? And have like-minded or shared beliefs in terms of, especially in this community, religious trauma and how it affects us. So, for me, the idea that original trauma or feeling alone may have evolved into a human thinking pattern that is in some of us, some humans, and that makes them colonizers. This idea that they're so hurt that they have to colonize others, they have to control others, they have to enslave others, they have to kill others, because if they don't, then they're running the risk of being hurt again. And so this whole process of them hurting others, enslaving others, and colonizing others is out of them trying to protect themselves from never ever experiencing that really painful thing, you know. And obviously, through years of therapy, usually people get to this point, but we're talking about people that have almost an abundance of resources too, and so, if you look clean and you look right, you're never going to question whether you're wrong, and this idea has been really refined over the generations and over the centuries. So now it becomes an absolute pure thought that, this is how this one group should be, and they should be in control of the majority and what have you. And we see this seeping into religion, and it's hard to fathom. It's hard to believe, because in a place like religion, we were so accustomed to being safe. We thought we were being safe. We thought that we could be vulnerable and share and, open ourselves up, and God would forgive and help us, mend wounds. And instead, we found judgment. We found, hatred. We found patriarchy. We found domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexism. We found all these things that we find outside, inside the church. And it hurt the most because they dressed it up as if God ordained this, God wanted this, God had this planned out, and it's for me, it's just really terrible bad mouthing of God. The fact that we can pick and choose for God what God feels and wants, it just doesn't make sense, you know. So for me, the whole idea of showing up is traumatizing in the sense that maybe I don't want to show up. Maybe I did enough of that, physically, that it's weighed on me. Maybe I need more time. Maybe I need to be on my own for for a longer period of time and stuff. So we are beginning to understand that community is not the first choice a lot of people are clinging to, because they're traumatized. And, so it's hard to even trust or fathom how community could work. That won't hurt them the way that the previous colonizing community did. I think everyone has that in the back of their mind, what's so different about this space? I've been hurt by it. I've been hurt by this structure. You say community, I just think of, something else. And so and a lot of people will associate this space and community with church. And so we also have that going, it's a deep symbol association that has been, really cemented by colonization, to believe that, oh, when people gather and they talk about God, that's copywritten by church. That deems it a church. So like we're also dealing with that as well. Like, how do we explain that public space is not church, but it has similarities to church, and those similarities are perhaps the positive pullaways from religion, because religion, when it's going through a process or is in relationship with colonization, it doesn't taint 100% of it. You know what I mean? Like it just like a parasite, it gets onto the host, which is the religion, and then starts manipulating things for the colonization to be preserved and thrive. So you got to think about it like that. Like religions are infected with colonization and their views and thoughts and ideas, but in essence, when you think about it, religion came up as a thought forward for humanity. It was a thought forward because it included humans gathering together, connecting. But it obviously was a prime opportunity to control the masses as well. So it wasn't 100 proof, flawless idea, but it was a step forward. So I think for us in the early 21st century, we have to definitely start thinking about how do we understand, how do we operate, and how do we partake in community that is not vulnerable as much to colonizing ideas and views? How do we honestly create a space that people can really be themselves? If some people don't want to show up, that's part of it, probably them. You know what I mean? Like, people shouldn't have to be forced or obligated to show up. And as a facilitator, we shouldn't be measured or judged or valued based on how many people showed up. You know what I mean? Like, all these things are still part of a colonizing method. And, it's hard. It's hard because we're in it moving forward and we have to learn new things and adapt. But the outer world is still traditional and is going to look at it and scratch their head and say, how do we make sense of this? You know? What do you think about that? I feel like I've overtalked.
No, I think everything you said, I agree with it. Um, but yeah, to me, it just seems like there is no right or wrong way of showing up, because we are all dealing with our own religious trauma or just trauma in general. And it can look different for everyone. Maybe uh, by not showing up can actually be beneficial for that individual. Because again, when you're coming into community and all those things, there may be preconceived notions of what it means to kind of come together, what's expected, like the colonized kind of, the concepts, these other kind of rules. So it's like, it doesn't take away that it is still happening, but at the same time, realizing that we are going through it. We're each of us, even for those that weren't able to make it or were planning to make it and couldn't, um, it's we're experiencing it here, we're experiencing it, they're experiencing it there. So yeah, I mean for me, you know, like thinking about it, before I came into the space, I was also, just to be completely honest, I've been in different kind of communities, and I always held this part of me, this idea that because something didn't work before, I am relying for this experience to make up for that. And then sometimes that can be scary, especially if there's been like this repetitive kind of cycle. Like, do you feel safe? Are you going to feel safe? And when I heard you talking in the beginning, all I kept thinking about was also myself, like even going to church, but just how so many of the ideas, this like you just have to come off like very righteous in a sense, uh as if you don't have any kind of sin, or you're just portraying this perfection. And we were having a conversation aside from all this the other day, and I mentioned, people, they dress up their stress. And so I think for many, including myself, I know that I was dressing up my stress or my traumas when I was going into church, or just being around people that seemed like nothing wrong was going on with them. And that's the pressure of, oh, well, what I was dealing with or what I'm dealing with, it really doesn't matter. Like we're here in the space. So, it is what it is for the time being. But I noticed that it only, the kind of feeling or that idea that overcame me, like I only felt it in that moment. But then once I was outside of the church, it's like you go back to reality. So it's like this kind of like this dressing up kind of thing, you know, this, what is it? Like there's these rules, in a way, like you are being forced to dress up a certain way, like I don't believe that God is judging. It's the people. The people are putting words into God, the universe. They're the ones that are afraid. They're the ones that are, uh, we're in a climate of this fear mongering thing that has been happening. It's not a new term, anyways, but it's been happening for many, many generations and in the church culture. So this fear, of not being accepted. And then what happens when you're not being accepted? You then are experiencing the aloneness that you talk about. And so because you're in a position like that, you then are seeking power. Like everyone is just seeking power. Everyone is just trying to polish how they look or what they can bring to the table, what kind of titles. I am Pastor so and so, or I do this, and that. But then it's like at the end of the day, do any of the titles matter? Or does what truly matter is just what kind of person you are in general? Like, why do I only have to look a certain way when I'm in this church space? So, yeah, I don't know if that added on to.
Oh, it did. It did. Yeah, as you were talking, you brought to our mind, or helped brought to our mind, that the community members in public space are not actually pressured to meet and gather, because we're all on individual journeys. But public space should be more interpreted as like, um, like a review point, like a check-in in terms of, what's going on, and if something significant of a breakthrough has, happened, and, your journey basically, and just sharing other travelers, or sharing, tips, secrets, better ways to do things that worked for them, whatever. But this is not meant to be something that we go to connect with God. This is something that we should come to. We've already connected to God. We're just coming together to share amongst each other. And I think this is more of an inverted way, in comparison to traditional religions such as Christianity. When it has a colonized interpretation to it, it's saying that, the one God is at this one place at this one time of the week. And, that's usually church or mosque or temple. Whereas what we're offering is this meta spiritual kind of theory or attempt method, where, you connect with God, but the reason you come into community is not to find God, but to share with others. And in that sharing, that's a form of love, that's a form of compassion, that's a form of investing. So even the concept of tithing is embedded in it, without this social awkwardness of, you know, specifically tithing or a way of tithing financially. But now it's more like tithing is beyond money. It's about, value and skill, and, things that bring energy and can give energy. So investing or mentoring other people, creating friendships, sharing resources and tips, these are all things that, stimulate a social capital amongst one another. That's not really, forced or life threatening, you know. So I think this is also another complicated dimension to public space, where we're not going to see people showing up in the same way. Showing up most likely needs to evolve and be redefined. And so, maybe that's something that we can add to, public spaces, words, of redefining as a community is, showing up, you know, because we also have the algorithm of attention, right? And we're not trying to compete with that, because, from our perspective, it's a colonized thing. So we're actually in opposition of that. Instead of taking people's attention, or, creating platforms and structures that work off of siphoning and holding people's attention, creating something that's just free access and free roam. Um, but then we have to think about the safety, because, like anything, when you open access things, it's open for all attacks and threats. So this is also part of the research, in terms of thinking about how to better public space so that it could be ready for the public on a more, um, deeper way, more accessible. But it holds that protection piece, keeping a community of religiously traumatized people safe. You know, and that's pretty challenging. That's hard, because we don't want to become the oppressor. You know, and especially when we're picking and choosing, like as if we have the right. So, that's tough. But yeah, we just wanted to talk about this today because it was on our mind a lot, and we didn't want people to, think that how we are interpreting it is a specific way. We're not. Like, there's no shame that's required. No one should feel ashamed because they didn't make it, or they didn't show up, or they're not showing up, or what have you. Like, this, honestly, this space is for everybody else. Like, this is not for me, not for my ego or glorification. I just honestly love spending time with people, and that's what this space becomes, just an opportunity in our busy lives to come together and just spend time, talk, hear each other, you know, receive love through positive feedback, maybe through listening and stuff like that, So, is there anything that was on your mind, your soul, your spirit that you wanted to talk about before we kind of close up this space?
Um, I just want to say I really appreciate what you started here because, you know, in life, we're just all expected to do so much. And if you don't meet those guidelines, then you're not adequate enough. You're not enough. And then that does build that guilt. Then you start feeling ashamed uh, because you didn't keep your word. So I don't know if that makes you think about like, uh, or have you ever in your past experienced that when you're like talking to God or whatever, but you associate God with church. And then because you couldn't make it to church, you already put yourself down and you think because of what others have said, or maybe as a child, like, God is going to punish you, you know, this, and that. So that kind of, it builds this fear. So just imagine if you're a child, how that feels. And would you feel comfortable to then, be around spaces that are godlike or, um, so as an adult now, like even for myself, I am very careful, like where I put my foot in, things I'm going to say. And, if there were more spaces like this, I think it can make people's lives a little easier because we already deal with so much. There's just so much going on in life. And then to follow another kind of, set up of rules, it's like you're breaking the law. It's like you don't even belong here anymore. You're an alien, basically. So I really do appreciate this because God knows how many times I've been traumatized, you know, in religious spaces and people that come off super religious and have no idea how harmful their language is, even if it's something they regurgitated from someone else that maybe taught them or in Bible school or something. I don't know. Um, it feels good to be part of something like this.
Well, thank you for that. Definitely. Um, I mean, what do you think we should do different? Do we need to do anything different? I mean, is there something maybe that should change or be added to the space to maybe give off a better persuasive impression that this is safe and people should want to, be part of it? I don't know. What do you think about that?
Hmm. That's actually that's a very tricky question because there seems to be like there is no one way to kind of put it together. Um, but I mean, the way that it's established now, uh, it is not like no one is being reprimanded or for not showing up. But I guess maybe still sharing like what was spoken about and stuff like that. Um, just so folks probably don't feel like, oh, because I already missed this session or maybe the next session, I'm just going to stop coming
Mm,
completely because I feel guilty or ashamed for not showing up. So then adding more to this or um, to the subject too, that there's really no consequence. God is not here to shame you.
right, right.
Um, God is in all spaces. So,
Yeah. Yeah, you're right, because we have been thinking about public space as kind of like this place of refuge, a shelter, so to speak. And a shelter is a space, for the people, and so I guess we see ourselves as more as the custodial part of it, just keeping the space up and running, making sure it's available, you know, at when we say it is, and opening the space when we say we will open the space, because you never know who might show up, um, who might need to just get away from their everyday and just check it out, So I guess from front of house to back of house for this project, it's been something that all around we had to learn and really start to embody more of, and try to understand better. This concept of, serving people, and not that you're not measured based on how many you serve or how frequent you serve, but just being available to serve, I think is at least good enough. It's a starting point, right? Like, just to be willing and able to be ready on standby, instead of just talking about it, but actually just standing by to take action, ready to just jump in, kind of like hopscotch, you know what I mean? Like jumping rope, that whole mentality of you don't jump in too early kind of thing, but there's always someone that's just ready, at a moment's notice or at a designated time to be available to jump in. So we really have been like redefining for ourselves what a shaman and journey even is, or how to facilitate a space such as this, because we are stepping into fairly new spaces, you know. So really, there's no rules. We're formulating it as we go to make sure it's as best as possible, But yeah, I think we did really good in terms of like really just trying to share for our other members, you know, not to feel bad about not showing up, don't feel guilty and don't feel shame. But the space is not like where we used to come from. I think a lot of us came from similar colonized religious backgrounds where, it was forced, and that was traumatizing. And you know, a lot of us are millennials, so we have a mentality sort of to try to manage our own time. We don't like people managing and forcing us to do things and stuff like that. So it is a sense of freedom at the same time. Um, but in terms of rejuvenation, a place of community and empathy and compassion, where do we fit that into our lives? Or has that kind of been like socially, pushed aside? Are we coming out of a generation of people that just push our own self needs to the side for the betterment of others? Like, maybe a lot of us are, pleasers, people pleasers, and we're always trying to take care of everybody else, but we never really make time to take care of ourselves. That kind of would make sense to me as to why these kind of people are not showing up to places or spaces like this because it's for them. It's not for others, and so maybe that takes a little bit more time for people to, I guess, want to invest in themselves in this way. Um, but again, like we brought up earlier, there's so much happening in the world right now. It's scary even, and maybe this is the bottom of the totem pole in terms of priority. Like, and we get that, we feel that, but I guess for us, we're very passionate about people, helping people, loving people, even as an introvert. So, um, just holding these spaces, which we will continue to do, is our gift.